Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the latest events and goings on in the Paul Flores, Ruben Flores, Kristin Smart case. As a reminder, Kristin Smart, a Cal Poly freshman, went missing 26 years ago, and last year Paul and Ruben Flores were arrested in connection with her murder. Paul has been accused of her murder and his father Ruben accused of helping Paul cover up the crime. It's been a very busy week in the courthouse with multiple witnesses being called to the stand, so bear with me, this is going to take a little bit longer than my normal update. So anyway, here we go. To start the week, Tim Davis took the stand, and if you remember, he was the person who walked partly back with Kristin on the night she disappeared, before leaving her with Paul Flores and Cheryl when he went home. He was friends with a number of people at the party, and a couple of whom were celebrating birthdays, and he was questioned about details and the layout of the party, and there was a pool table there and a makeshift bar, etc. He remembers seeing Kristin fall on the floor with Paul Flores on the floor next to her. At one point, I remember looking back and Kristin Smart was on the ground and Paul Flores was next to her, he said. When the party ended, he'd been arranging for people to get lifts either to downtown San Luis Obispo or home. He saw Cheryl and told her she'd just missed a lift and so offered to walk her back home. When he saw Kristin Smart lying on the lawn next door, he'd noticed she was cold and had goose pimples, and Kristin apparently said, "I'm cold, I want to go home." And Tim says Paul Flores at this moment came out of a dark walkway along the side of the house and offered to help them walk Kristin back. The four of them turned onto Campus Way before Cheryl told Tim he didn't need to go the rest of the way. Tim says that Paul told him, "I've got her from here," and this, by the way, is the same thing that Cheryl told the court last week about what Paul Flores was saying. Was Flores intoxicated? "It didn't seem like he was unable to walk," Tim replied. So Tim left the other three when he could see the dorms. He said, "I remember I could see the dorms. It was a simple walk. You could see where they were going to go." He said he handed Kristin off to Paul, who put his arm around her waist. He says he looked back before he left to make sure that Paul could actually support her as they walked. He said at one point, "I've had to relive that night for 26 years. And had to think about it, recollect about it and remember it," he said. "Everything that came from the party has led to 26 years plus to sitting in this courtroom right now." Tim has faced some criticism over the years because he didn't really want to get involved in the case at some point, according to some reports, and defence attorney Robert Sanger asked him about this and asked him about being harassed over the years for his involvement. Tim says that people have come to his house and sent him letters asking him to stand up and testify and to be a man. Sanger asked him if he knew Smart prior to the party, and he didn't, and said that Smart had introduced herself as Roxy when they'd actually met. There was some confusion on Sanger's part when he asked Tim to specify the point where he separated from the others on an aerial map. Sanger said, "You told Detective Stewart it was behind the health centre," and Tim responded, "That is the back of the health centre." Had Tim ever told Pouverill, who's the prosecuting attorney, "I just want to put this F-word guy away," and that was the reason he was in court testifying, to which Tim answered, "Yes, that's correct." Apparently, Tim had never in previous depositions said that Paul came out of the side of the house until his preliminary testimony, which was last year, and Tim said, "We were walking away from the house and Paul came off from the left towards me. That's the only place he could have been coming from." Misick then asked Tim about drinks, etc. at the party, and it seems like the defence are trying to create an element of doubt in people's testimony based on the amounts that they were drinking. A juror question on this point was, "When you were walking with Kristin, did her breath smell like alcohol?" And Tim didn't remember. Another juror question was Kristin's speech slurred and hard to understand? And he said, "It was slurred and quiet. She sounded like a person who just wanted to be sleeping." We then had a friend of Paul Flores take the stand. Jeremy Moon says he hung out with Paul Flores 1 to 2 times a month, and he said that he hung out with Paul on Sunday, May the 26th. He said he'd noticed that Paul Flores had a bruise on his eye, and when he asked Paul about it, Paul told him that he woke up with the bruise, which is a bit of an odd response if you ask me. Anyway, the following day, on Monday, he played a basketball game with Paul and 2 other people in the afternoon, and he said that Paul didn't get hit in the face at any point during their game. And this was one of the couple of statements Paul's made to police over time about how he actually got the bruise on his face. On cross-examination, Sanger asked if Jeremy told a detective on July the 8th, 1996, that he didn't actually see any marks on Paul's face. And Jeremy says, "I don't remember saying that. I saw the black eye on Sunday the 26th. We had the District Investigator J.T. Camp back to the stand again, and he was asked to testify about the meeting with Jeremy prior to the preliminary hearing. He was questioned intensively about whether he'd discussed the discrepancies over the black eye with Moon, and it turns out that they hadn't actually specifically spoken about the black eye. Another witness, Lawrence Kennedy. He's a now retired campus police detective. He was assigned to investigate the Kristin Smart missing person case when she didn't return to campus on the Tuesday following the Memorial Day weekend. He'd interviewed Paul Flores twice in the days following that, once on Tuesday evening in his dorm room and once at the Cal Poly Police Department, which was on the Thursday. After getting the assignment on the Tuesday, May the 28th, he immediately sought out people that had been at the Crandall party on May the 24th and started to interview them. When he spoke to Paul Flores in his Santa Lucia Hall dorm room, his report said that Paul was very nervous and he could see his heart beating through his t-shirt. He also noted what he called an injury on Paul below his right eye, and it looks like a bruise or a black eye, an arc under his right eye darker than the surrounding skin, he said. And this is when Paul told him that he'd got the black eye playing basketball over the weekend. Paul's story then was that he'd separated from Kristin near the driveway behind Sequoia Hall, and he then went to his dorm room where he went to bed before taking a shower at around 5 a.m. He said the only physical contact he'd had with Kristin that night was when he hugged her twice during the walk home to keep her warm. At the Thursday interview, Kennedy says that bruising was still visible under his right eye, i.e. that's Paul's right eye, and he also noticed that Paul had scratches on his knees, and again Paul said he got these scratches from playing basketball on the Monday. He said Paul told him that he didn't find Kristin Smart attractive and denied asking Cheryl Anderson for a kiss before separating from her at the crosswalk. Well, this bit amazed me. He was told that he could remember what time he left his dorm room and walked to the Crandall Road party if he could look at a TV guide to see what was playing. Well, Kennedy then explained to the jurors what a TV guide was. Really? I'm not sure what the age of the jurors are, what their cross-section is, but that really does bring home to me just how long ago this took place and how much has changed in the intervening years, 26 years by now. Paul had told him that when he returned to Santa Lucia Hall in the morning, there was another student who saw him, and Kennedy asked Paul to find the student so that he could speak to him, but what do you know, Paul never provided him with that person's name. On cross-examination, Sanger asked Kennedy about where they were in Paul's dorm when he spoke to him on the Tuesday, and he said that he thought that they were both standing, and he also asked about the mini fridge. Now, this is the second time Sanger has asked about a fridge or a mini fridge in Paul's dorm room, and this has puzzled me. However, I think what's going to happen here is that when the evidence comes to be discussed about the cadaver dogs having a positive read in Paul's dorm, Sanger's going to point to it being food from the fridge that has potentially gone off or something like that, and that caused a false positive reaction amongst the dogs. Also, Kennedy was asked if he knew about a traffic warrant pending against Flores, and perhaps that could explain why he was particularly nervous when that interview took place, or meeting rather. Overnight, we had a juror who didn't return. Apparently there has been a bit of COVID outbreak going on amongst the court attendees, so an alternate was sworn in on Paul Flores' jury. So Kennedy was asked to go through the items that were collected from Kristin Smart's dorm room during his investigation, and we saw various things like a social security card, a Visa card, an ID card, Wells Fargo transaction record, which showed a balance of $94.30, and a Wells Fargo checkbook. Amazingly, yet again, Mike Kennedy explained to the jurors what a checkbook was. Really, my comments about the TV guide are just as valid on this checkbook explanation. There was an audio recording of Kennedy's May the 30th interview with Paul Flores, and some of it was edited out. In particular, we know that one bit that was edited out was when Paul had been referred to by other students as Chester the molester. Says it all, doesn't it, really? Paul was asked in the recording how he got to the party, and he explained that he was going to see his sister, who was off campus, and just happened to pass by the party and went inside. Paul had said that he'd been drinking somewhat, and when asked how he ended up with Kristin that night, he said he wasn't sure, but said that the girl went by the name of Roxy, and he left the party at the same time. He said that Roxy was fine and walking on her own as they went back to the dorms, and he gave her 2 hugs because she was cold, but doesn't remember what they talked about. Now, this calling her Roxy and saying essentially just met her doesn't really gel with the previous testimony we've heard, where people have said that he was essentially stalking her, hanging around the dorms, going in and being stared at into the shops, etc. Sanger tries to publish an aerial map of the dorm buildings so that he can speak about the locations, etc., but can't locate his exhibit, and the prosecutors gave him theirs to use. Now, Sanger is really not having a very good time with his documentation, is he? Sanger asked Kennedy about a phone call that Kristin's friend Margarita had at around 3 a.m. on the 29th, and she thought at that time it could have come from Kristin. At this point, Sanger can't find his copy of Kennedy's notes. Oh dear. He had to break up for lunch here. Hopefully he'll look for his notes in the meantime. Kennedy had asked San Luis Obispo's sheriff office to inspect Paul Flores' vacated dorm room a little bit after the events of that weekend, and this was in June the 24th. There was apparently some tape put on the door, and there was only one other person as well as Kennedy who entered the dorm room during that time. In other words, how well was the crime scene being preserved in the meantime? Asked about different sightings of Kristin that had been reported over the summer of that year, 1996, Kennedy said that he received 75 to 80 sightings, but there was no pattern to these. They were scattered from Disneyland to Northern California, he said. And did any of the follow-up investigations on those sightings lead to Kristin Smart, he was asked? He said they did not. Well, that's pretty damned obvious for me. I don't quite know why that question was even asked. Our next witness was Lieutenant Robert Cudworth. And Robert worked for the Cal Poly Police, and he'd been working for only about 8 weeks when he started to work on the missing persons case. In his report, he mentions that he'd interviewed Cheryl, Tim, Jen, and a couple of other students before he made contact with Paul Flores that afternoon. Paul Flores had apparently told Cudworth that he saw Kristin Smart at the Crandall party, but did not talk to her. Well, that's definitely in contradiction with what some of the other witnesses said. Paul said he wasn't attracted to Kristin, and Cudworth's report quotes Paul saying he did not want to get together with her. Cudworth also took part in the interview with Paul Flores at the police station on May the 30th, where he also noted the scratches on Paul's knees and his black eye. And we had a juror question. What was Paul's demeanour during your first conversation with him? And Cudworth responds that he was cooperative and there were, in quotes, no red flags at that time. Our next witness, Rick Newfield, who's a retired detective. He worked with the St. Louis Obispo's Sheriff's Coroner's Office and was assigned to process Paul's vacated dorm room, as he puts it. He processed the Santa Lucia Hall Room 128 for hairs, fibres and fingerprints, but unfortunately Cal Poly's custodial crew had already cleaned the room after Paul moved out, and apparently there were no usable fingerprints found. He also packaged up a mattress and a mattress cover on June the 29th and packaged them as evidence. Okay, so we're now on August the 11th, and we had witness William Handley, a retired investigator, take the stand. Now, Rubin and his defence attorney and his jury are all excluded from that day's proceedings, so this is something that's just relevant to Paul's case alone. Handley was a senior investigator with the San Luis Obispo District Attorney's Office. He said that he interviewed Paul twice, once on May the 31st and once on June the 19th, and Paul's stories had inconsistencies between the two interviews. In his first interview on Friday, May the 31st, 96, he put to Paul that he was a witness and we believe was the last person to see Kristin Smart alive. Oddly, because the station was busy that time, the interview actually took place with Paul in their car, and Paul had told them during the interview that he played pool in Santa Lucia Hall on May the 24th before going to his dorm room and drinking 2 beers. We then heard again how Paul was going to his sister's house and passed the party, and decided to stop there. He asked Paul if he was attracted to Kristin Smart, and Paul responded, "No, I don't like those type of girls." He said his only contact with Kristin was when she introduced herself as Roxy at the party, and then they walked home. Paul also told them that Kristin appeared to be intoxicated. Again, he said he wasn't attracted to Kristin or, in quotes, girls like that because she'd been flirting with multiple men at the party. A quite key piece of evidence from that was when Paul told him he saw a girl from his statistics class standing with Kristin after the party had ended, and he decided to walk with them. Now, Paul didn't mention Tim, didn't mention that Kristin was having trouble walking, and didn't mention helping her walk. Quite important omissions, I would think. Flores said that on the way home he rubbed Kristin's shoulders once or twice because she was cold, not in a sexual way. Now, Flores had apparently offered up the sexual manner detail on his own. He'd only said goodbye to Cheryl, and he and Kristin walked together until he left to go to his dorm, and he doesn't remember them talking about anything at that time. The last thing he said he told Cheryl was goodbye, and after separating he, in quotes, just went to his dorm room, and asked why he didn't make sure Kristin got back to her dorm room. He said, "I didn't even think about it." Now, this is quite at odds with Cheryl's story, who we've already heard when she said that Paul asked her for a kiss and a cuddle just before she went back to her dorm. Paul had said he laid in his bed for a while and then went to the communal dorm room bathroom after vomiting into his mouth, and when he returned to bed he woke up sometime later and took a shower because of the bad taste in his mouth. Peveril then took out a map which highlighted the route that Paul said he took back when he was retracing his steps from that night. "What did Paul tell you he did from Saturday morning to Saturday evening when he went to dinner?" And Handley responded, "He didn't." He said that on the Sunday morning, Rubin picked him up and took him home to Arroyo Grande, and Handley said he noticed Paul's black eye, which he said he got from the basketball game. It was put to him that this contradicts what he told Mario, who testified that Paul told him he was pushed at a party, and also contradicts what Paul told Handley in June. He was asked in the May interview if he thought that Kristin was alive or dead, and Paul told him he thought Kristin was dead. Out of all the people he interviewed, Paul was the only person to answer the question in that way. However, this was stricken from the record on the grounds of hearsay. To go through the inconsistencies, Paul was asked back for the June interview, and in that interview he first said he didn't know how he got a black eye, and then he said it was from changing a stereo in his truck. Well, that's the third story Paul's told about this. He denied asking Cheryl for a hug and kiss before parting ways, and denied having any contact with Smart at the party. Apparently in the June interview he'd been asked but declined to take a polygraph test, and then says he did lie when he said he got his black eye during a basketball game and called it a fib and a little white lie. At this interview, when asked what he thought had happened to Kristin, he said he didn't know, and maybe she went off with somebody or maybe she was abducted. He was pushed on this at one point, being asked, "Do you think it was an accident?" and responding, "I guess anything's possible." He was asked quite a lot of other things in the interview, but generally said he didn't remember, like asking a girl who told him she had a boyfriend for a cell phone number. He didn't remember that. He didn't remember falling down with Smart or trying to kiss her. He doesn't remember trying to forcibly kiss 2 other girls at the party. His reason for this was that he must have, in quotes, blacked out at various moments during the night. That's not how blackouts work, the interviewers put to him. You don't black out one moment and remember the next. It was put to him that somebody had seen him with a black eye on the Saturday, but he insisted he got it on the Monday. On cross-examination, Sanger puts to Hanley, "By June the 19th, Paul Flores was the main focus of this case." "Yes, he was," responded Hanley. It was put to Hanley that he was threatening Flores with a polygraph test as an investigative technique to draw out a confession, and the response was essentially, asking somebody to take a test is not a technique. He said rather the polygraph test is an investigative technique itself. Paul Flores did not confess to the crime. No, he didn't. Then Sanger goes through a whole host of things that Paul Flores did tell the truth about, where his sister lived, drinking beers, talking to a girl from his English class, etc., etc. He was then taken through his 31st of May interview with Paul Flores, and this was in some detail line by line, and at this point 3 jurors were apparently close to nodding off. "Paul Flores told you on June the 19th that his parents had told him to stop talking to the police, right?" "He did say that," said Hanley. Sanger then pushed a little bit on Paul Flores' age, who was 19 at the time, trying to say that he's going to make something up about his black eye because he's really a child, and had to rephrase that as being okay, he was a young adult speaking to an older adult. Anyway, all this was just calls for speculation objections, and the judge sustained the objection. Hanley told Sanger that he'd seen Paul on the Sunday and the Monday, and Sanger responded, "So the basketball was on Sunday?" And Hanley responded, "No, Jeremy saw him on Sunday with the black eye. They played basketball on the Monday." Our next witness was Rick Newfield, who's a retired detective. This was a continuation of his testimony that ended on the Wednesday. 8 photographs were shown which showed Paul Flores' dorm room back in 1996, and we had different angles of the mattress, the left-hand side, and different parts of the room. Could the dorm room have been contaminated, Sanger asked, and asked about the proper procedure for preserving a crime scene, really just trying to put a seed of doubt into the jurors' minds. On recross, Puvril asked him to describe exactly how the evidence is packaged, and he talked about using gloves, using bags, etc., and how things are folded and properly kept, tags used, etc., etc. Sanger then asked him, for the defence, would you have looked for DNA at a scene in 1996? As I recall, DNA analysis was still a relatively new development in 1996, he responded. Waiting a month to process a scene would not be ideal, correct? Correct, responded Newfield. Was it your understanding that the dorm room had been significantly altered? Puvril objects that the question is vague, and the judge sustained on this. On redirect, Puvril asked Newfield why he cut off a corner of Paul's mattress for testing, and Newfield said, I was informed that a cadaver dog had alerted on that location, and Sanger objects that this is hearsay, and the judge instructs the jury not to consider the statement as a fact. We had our next witness for the day, Jana, who was a friend of Crystal, who, if you remember, is Kristin's roommate. Jana had visited San Luis Obispo to meet a friend Crystal on May the 24th, 1996. Jana and Crystal went to a function that day, and then Crystal left to spend the night in her boyfriend's dorm room, and Jana slept on Crystal's bed. She recalls a significant pile of clothing on Kristin Smart's bed. Puvril asked if somebody could sleep on the bed with the amount of clothes on there, and she said there is no way. And she also said that when they returned to the room after the function, the bed was in the same state it was the last time she saw it. At 3 a.m. she woke up to somebody knocking on the window. Jana recognised the person knocking as Crystal's boyfriend's roommate, Ted, and Ted asked her to come outside to smoke a cigarette with him, so she met him outside. They hung around for about 15 minutes outside, and during those 15 minutes they didn't see anybody else in the vicinity. He wanted a place to sleep for the night as Crystal and her boyfriend were staying in his room, and Jana said she invited him inside and allowed him to sleep on the floor of room 120. The pile of clothing was still there. She said that she woke up around 9 a.m. and that nobody, except for 3 a.m. when Ted knocked on the window, had been in or out of the room. Now apparently when she woke up she found that Ted was in the bed with her, but on top of the bed coverings. And Sanger asked if she remembered being put to bed by Jenna, who was somebody who lived in the dorm directly across from Crystal. I guess this is trying to say she was drunk, so therefore she's going to have gaps in her memory of that night. Sanger also said, "You really didn't like Ted, did you?" And she said, "He wasn't my friend. You described him as angry, defensive and mean." And Jana responded, "He had a sarcastic personality." Sanger wanted to discuss what occurred in bed between Jana and Ted, but Pouvril objected and then Jana was dismissed. After lunch we had our third witness, Karen, who's a mother of Paul's friend. She was asked to speak about the day her son graduated from Arroyo Grande High School in June 1996, and friends had held a small after-party in Karen's apartment. Paul Flores was in attendance. She was trying out a new video camera she'd just purchased, and she said that she was just messing with her son's friends, and Pouvril played the tape for the jurors. There were some jokey exchanges with the friends, and then Karen turns the camera to Paul Flores, who's sitting at the table. "What about you, Paul? Are we going to see you walk at Cal Poly in 4 years?" And Paul laughs. "No way." Somebody else said, "Maybe walk into court." And then Karen said, "Hey, what do you know about that missing girl? What did you do with her, Paul?" Paul looked down at the table and didn't respond. Karen said that Paul's demeanour changed and he never talked to me again after that. On cross-examination, Sanger asked Karen if she was aware how many times Paul had been asked that question, and she said that she didn't. Misik, for the defence, asked, "You were asking silly, sarcastic questions, expecting silly, sarcastic answers, right?" And Karen said, "Most likely." That was it for her. She was excused just after lunch. We had another appearance of J.T. Camp, the DA investigator. He was asked to look at and produce some partial dorm phone records, and this showed that there was a phone call made by Paul to his sister Irma Linda's house at 5:59 p.m. on the 24th of May. Now, Paul had told investigators that he didn't call his sister. The next call from Paul Flores' dorm phone was not made until Sunday, 26th of May at 9:47 a.m, and that was to Ruben Flores' house. Pouvril then showed a map showing that the distance between Paul's dorm room and his sister's house on Olive Street is only 0.97 miles. He was then shown a stack of photos and asked to identify them. Now, they're photos of the window of Paul Flores' dorm room. Camp had taken these only a week ago, and there was quite a bit of debate about whether they were admissible or not, but essentially they were allowed in, and they showed how the dorm room windows opened, and also that there's a parking lot just outside the window. A juror question, did you measure the height and width of the window? And apparently he did. The window is 69.5 inches wide by 46 inches high. Another juror question, is the way the windows open similar to how they opened in the 1990s? And Camp says that he was actually a Cal Poly student from 1991 to 1995, and the windows opened in the same way. On cross-examination, Sanger points out that the call from Paul's dorm to Irma Linda's house was only 4 seconds long. Sanger asked Camp, at that time a 4-second phone call would mean what? And Camp responded, a short phone call. The duration could have been because of a brief exchange, because the answer machine picked up, or because one party hung up. All pretty obvious, don't you think? Sanger asked him, at night, if you came up to a window at Muir Hall and the blinds were open and the lights were off, you could see inside pretty easy, right? And Camp responded, no, you're leaving out the screen. Even with the screen, you could tell if people were inside, right? And Camp responded, at 2 a.m, no, I doubt it. A juror question, were no pictures taken of the outside of the dorm room at the time? And Camp said he's not aware of any in the case file. Well, that was pretty much it. Just before closing, Pouvril informed the court that the trial is running ahead of schedule, and we'll be back next week. That's Monday the 15th of August. Phew, that was quite a lengthy run-through of the week's events. In my opinion, I think Proveral's doing a very good job of painting a picture of what happened, who the people were involved, how they related to each other, and a lot of the inconsistencies that are arising out of Paul's own account of events. I hope you've liked this update. If you do, then please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and that way you won't miss out on future updates as they're published. Bye for now.